Tonight, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas joins me now. Senator, regardless of the content and what anyone thinks about your content, I was heartened by the fact that the New York Times said, this is a place where you want to exhibit different opinions. It's the opinion age, the op-ed page. But what do you make of this newest sort of walk back on that, saying, oh, you know what, it was rushed. We made a rushed decision. We never should have printed it.
Yeah, Martha, I don't know what to make of it. I can tell you my op-ed doesn't meet the New York Times standards. It far exceeds their standards, which are normally full of left-wing sophomoric drivel. And I find it amazing that in the last 24 hours, the editor of the New York Times and the publisher of the New York Times have both defended their decision to publish this op-ed. But in the face of the woke mob of woke kids that are in their newsroom, they tucked tail and they ran. They confessed and said they were going to go into re-education camp and they were going to cut the number of op-eds they run. And for that, I will apologize, or I will say to the world, you're welcome for getting the New York Times to run less of the garbage that you normally see in their pages.
Well, I think they should, as all media outlets and newspapers should, strive to show different opinions on their pages. It is interesting that apparently Jack Dorsey of Twitter stopped following the New York Times as a sign of protest to your piece. Also, Elliot Engel, who is obviously up for his election again as a congressman for New York, says that he's decided that he will not seek the editorial backing of the New York Times, which is interesting because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is just back to the opponent who's running against him, so who knows whether he would have gotten it anyway. But to the content of what you were writing about that provoked this controversy, here is the police commissioner in New York asking about the underlying subject that you wrote about. Watch this.
Does New York City need uniformed soldiers to keep the peace, rather?
Absolutely not.
So there is a lot of pushback to this idea that New York City does not, that it would provoke things, that it would make things worse and potentially more dangerous. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, I bet a lot of those business owners in Midtown Manhattan who had their business smashed by people who brought crowbars and bricks to a peaceful protest would probably beg to differ that the New York Police Department, not because of their own faults, but because of their hapless mayor, couldn't protect their property, their livelihoods. In some cases, many were threatened for felt threatened for their lives as well. But look, the New York Times has run editorials by Vladimir Putin, Recep Erdogan, by the Taliban. No problem there, but run one editorial from Tom Cotton that on a position that's supported by 58% of the American people, that we have a duty to protect our citizens' lives and livelihoods. Well, we're going to have to review our processes and we're going to cut the number of op-eds that we run. A child mob truly is in charge at the New York Times tonight.
Well, and as you also point out, it's an action that has been used by many presidents in the past to protect people in various situations during the civil rights movement as well. But to the notion, you're a veteran yourself, served in Iraq, and I wonder what you think about the National Guard, because, Governor Cuomo has kept 13,000 National Guard. He said, well, de Blasio didn't want them and that he would have to override them to send them in. But it seems to me that they are the people who are, sort of suited the best for this line of defense, no?
That's right, Martha. And as I've said all week long, that local law enforcement are in the front line of protecting their communities. But as we've seen in too many places, local law enforcement was either outnumbered or they had hapless Democratic politicians that were constraining them from protecting livelihoods and lives. The next step is the National Guard. And in many places, the National Guard has been called out and helped to quell the rioting and the looting that was hijacking peaceful protesters in places like Minneapolis or even in the nation's capital. But as you said, there are many historic examples that could be used where you use federal troops. That's simply a fact.
Well, you make a good point. I'm sure a lot of those store owners would have loved to have had the protection of the National Guard and still have their stores intact as New York starts to reopen. Also, I would just note that Mayor de Blasio was booed today at the New York celebration of life for George Floyd, to the point where he, really couldn't speak at that. Senator Cotton, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you, Martha.
More of the story coming up next after this. Stay with us.